England. The year was 1859. The naturalist Charles Darwin published his controversial book, The Origins of Species, A Theory on Evolution. In the meantime, a British writer, Edward Fitzgerald, took a bold step and published a different kind of book. This book contained the translation of poems by an Iranian poet. It became an instant success. The book was the Rubaiyat, and the poet was Omar Khayyam. Ghiafaddin Abdul Fath Umar ibn Ibrahim al-Nishaburi al-Khayyami was born in May between 1044 and 1048 in the town of Nishabur, in the province of Khorasan, located northeast of today's Iran. Khayyam. It means the Tentmaker. Some believe that he may have gotten the name because of what his father did, making tents. Hyams was a mathematician, a physician, an astronomer, and a philosopher who has influenced the world of science in an enormous way. However, he is most famous for his poetry. Out of about 300 pieces of poetry attributed to Hyams, only 70 to 90 of them are written by him for certain. And it is his poetry that tells us who he was and what he thought.
Neither you nor I know the eternal secrets. Neither you nor I know this enigmatic word. There is talk behind the curtain of you and I. Yet when the curtain disappears, there will remain neither you nor I.
Over 600 years after Christ, a new monotheistic belief started its spread from the Arabian Peninsula. It was called Islam. The Arabs conquered, defeated, and converted as they expanded their territories. They eventually reached the borders of China. Due to the strict Islamic beliefs, the Arabic language became predominant. People were expected to speak and write in Arabic. In the last centuries of the first millennium, the tribal Turks, commonly known as Turkomans, who lived in Central Asia, became devout Muslims. A member of the Kinnik tribe was called Seljuk. The Seljuk started expanding westward. They conquered land and defeated other powerful Turkish tribes who had established their own dynasties, such as Ghaznavids. This led to a takeover of countries like Iran. Eventually, they expanded to Asia Minor, taking land from powerful empires like the Byzantines. During Khayyam's lifetime, the Seljuks were in control in Iran. It has been said that Khayyam moved to Bukhara, then to Isfahan, the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate, a city in central Iran. Despite the multiple invasions, in places like Iran, which had enjoyed a rich culture for thousands of years, preservation of heritage was not uncommon. Many contributed to this effort. An Iranian epic writer by the name of Ferdowsi was one of them. He wrote a book called Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. This book contained mythical stories of the ancient Iranian heroes. Ferdowsi died in 1020. He was from the same region as Khayyam.
Oh, come, friend. Let us not worry about tomorrow. To live this moment of life without sorrow. For tomorrow, when we leave this temporary place, we will be spent with 7,000-year-olds face to face.
It was common for the powerful sultans to gather prominent scientists and philosophers and poets in their palaces and fund their studies and writings. As a result, the Seljuks rank high along with other Iranian dynasties of Turkish background, such as Ghaznavids and Safavids, who contributed to science, art, and architecture in a great way. The wonderful structures of these eras are still among the most beautiful in the world. Even though Khayyam did not fit the typical hired scientist, he was put in charge of a very important task: revising the calendar. In the 16th century, Pope Gregory revised the Julian Calendar. This is the calendar that is widely used today around the world. And although it is used on a daily basis, it wasn't used in many places like parts of Russia until the 20th century. Approximately 500 years before Pope Gregory, Omar Khayyam and a team of astronomers and scientists revised the Iranian calendar. It was called the Jalali Calendar. The name Jalali comes from Jalal, a tribute to the Seljuk Sultans. Today, the Jalali calendar is used in Iran and many other countries in Asia. The Jalali calendar is a solar calendar, where a year equals 365 days. That means that it shows the full revolution of the Earth around the Sun for a full year. The Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, where a year is approximately 354 days. Being a solar calendar, the Jalali calendar calculates the year to be 365 days, 0.242198. While the length of a year changes in so many years, today's scientists calculate a year to be 365 days, 0.242190. To this day, the Jalali calendar remains one of the most accurate calendars in the world. The Iranians celebrate the beginning of their new year at the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. They call it Nowruz. It simply means the new day. They calculate it to the hour, minute, and the second. Setting up a New Year table decorated with specific items such as a pot of hyacinth flower and a plate of newly grown greens is among many traditions kept to this day.
The Nowruz breeze caressing the face of a flower is delightful. In the meadow, a heart-warming face is delightful. Do not take delight away by speaking of yesterday. Be happy, and do not say of yesterday, because today is delightful.
Even though some people say that Nowruz was celebrated in the middle of August at one time, the celebration itself goes back thousands of years, predating Iranians' first monotheist prophet, Zoroaster. Zoroaster, or as pronounced in Persian, Zartusht, lived over 3,700 years ago. His ideology led to the first official religion in Iran, Zartushti. Zartushtis, or Zoroastrians, who hold fire sacred, live mainly in Iran and northern India to this day.
On this carousel which we wonder about, as if it is a rotating lantern, the sun the light, and the world the lantern, circling, we are just like faces painted on it.
Maybe it is the movement of the stars at night that makes many Iranian poets, including Khayyam, to use the word carousel in their poetry. Or it is the color of the sky that brings them to use the color blue when describing the world. But what is known is that it was over 500 years after Khayyam that an astronomer by the name of Galileo used the Copernican ideology and presented his findings about the rotation of the planets. Today, the Earth is commonly known as the blue planet. Hyams was an outstanding mathematician. Even though the political atmosphere presented many difficulties, he wrote many books, including Problems of Arithmetics, a book on music, and one on algebra. He completed them before he was 25 years old. Legend has it that between the years of 1070 and 1074, he lived in the cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, which are now part of today's Uzbekistan. It has been said that it was there where he wrote his famous work, Treatise on Demonstration of Problems of Algebra. It has been written that not all the Western mathematicians were familiar with algebra until the 18th century. Khayyam's algebra book was first translated in 1851 in Europe, a few years before his poetry. According to some experts, Khayyam was the first mathematician to conceive a general theory of cubic equations. They also say that he demonstrated that cubic equations have more than one solution. Khayyam's constant quest included questions such as finding a point on quadrant of a circle in such manner that when a normal is dropped from the point to one of the bounding radii, the ratio of the normal's length to that of the radius equals the ratio to the segments determined by the foot of the normal. Or finding a right triangle having the property that the hypotenuse equals the sum of one leg plus the altitude on the hypotenuse. These and many other questions led him to solve the cubic equation. Khayyam was from the Avicennan school of science. Ibn Sina, the son of Sina, commonly known by his Latin name Avicenna, who lived between 980 to 1037, was a great physician and a philosopher whose school of thought attracted many scientists, including Khayyam. It has been said that Ibn Sina had more than 450 pieces of work. one of which, the Alai Encyclopedia, was written in pure Farsi, the Iranian language. To this day, Avicenna's contributions to the world of medicine are discussed in many medical schools throughout the world. Khayyam did extended studies on solutions for many mathematical problems and algebraic equations. This paved the road for scientists such as Descartes, Pascal, and Sir Isaac Newton, who came hundreds of years after Khayyam. A scientist and a poet? Some say they were two separate people. Were there two Khayyams? The proponents of two Khayyams cite the works of some historians and bibliographers, such as Behari and Arudi, to say that if there is one Khayyam, he had to live to be 120 years old. They continue by saying that neither Khayyam the scientist nor Khayyam the poet mentions the other in his works. Two men to have the same name and be born in the same town? Two men with the same names to become famous and travel to the same cities? Two men to be granted acceptance to the palace of the same sultan? Two men, both prominent, yet no historian or bibliographer making the distinction? In a poem translated by Edward Fitzgerald, Khayyam makes a play on his own name, the Tentmaker.
Hyams, who stitched the tent of science, has fallen in grief's furnace and been suddenly burned. The shears of fate have cut the tent ropes of his life, and the broker of hope has sold him for nothing.
For a time, I was with a master as a child. For a time, I was a master with pride. But listen to how I reached the end. I came from dust and went away like the wind.
Fitzgerald tells a story of Khayyam's meeting with the Sultanate Prime Minister, better known as the Vizier.
Omar Khayyam came to the Vizier not to ask for a title or office. He said, "The greatest boon you can give me is to let me spread wide the advantages of science and pray for your long life and prosperity." The Vizier tells us that when he found that Omar was sincere in his refusal, he pressed him no further, but granted him a yearly pension of 1,200 mitkals of gold from the treasury at Nishabur.
It has been said that Omar Khayyam stayed at the palace as a physician to the Seljuk Sultan and his 4 sons. Legend has it that Khayyam had described what his graveside would look like. Edward Fitzgerald.
Khwaja Nizami of Samarkand, who was one of his pupils, relates the following story.
I often used to hold conversation with my teacher, Omar Khayyam, in a garden. And one day he told me, "My tomb shall be in a spot where the north wind may scatter roses over it." Years later, I went to his resting place, and it was just outside the garden, and trees dropped flowers upon his tomb so that the stone was hidden under them.
They exemplified knowledge and propriety. They became the candle of light with friends and notoriety. They did not make it out of this dark night. They told a fabulous tale, and to sleep they went, so slight.
Some say that Khayyam was a Sufi, but was he? Sufi, a follower of Sufism, an ideology referred to as the mystical belief in Islam. Although many contemporary Islamic scholars do not consider Sufism as a part of Islam, traditionally, Sufis consider themselves Muslims. Sufism did not reach its heights for hundreds of years after Khayyam, even though it existed before him. Many Sufis emulated Khayyam's poetic style and wrote ruba'i, the singular form for rubaiyat, which means quatrains, poems in 4 lines. Among the famous Sufis are Abel Khair, Ghazali, Attar, and perhaps the most famous, Rumi. Rumi writes,
"Love is the way many sail to eternity, nights brightened by the wine of unity, a wine not forbidden by religion. My lips never dry till the morning of eternity."
The words wine and love appear in the Sufi poetry repeatedly. However, the Sufis believe that the wine is only a symbol to describe the intoxication by the divine love. In Islam, consumption of alcohol is forbidden. Embracing and becoming one with God is apparent in many Sufi poems. Khayyam's poems are different, and even though to this day his name is mentioned among the Sufis, his poetry does not contain a Sufi message.
Khayyam, if you are drunk with wine, be happy. If you are at a presence of a beautiful face, be happy. Since the end of the world is nothingness, imagine as if you don't exist, but since you do, be happy. They say that the lover and drinker will go to eternal damnation, a promise to us, not opposed when mentioned. If the lover and drinker are to be damned, then tomorrow heaven will be as empty as a palm of a hand.
Sadegh Hedayat, one of the most famous Iranian writers of the 20th century, wrote extensively about Khayyam's ruba'is. Hedayat, who was greatly influenced by other famous writers such as Kafka, Edgar Allan Poe, and Dostoevsky, lived from 1903 to 1951. Hedayat writes,
Khayyam was deeply concerned with life and death. He had concluded that he had to live life one day at a time.
In no time, this caravan of life passes. Seize the moment. How happy it passes. Oh, wine server, why worry about what others do? Bring the cup, for the night passes. Good and bad are a part of human nature. Happiness and sadness are part of fate. Do not look to the wheel of life for answers, for the wheel in wisdom is 1,000 times more helpless.
Throughout the years, the Rubaiyat has been translated to many different languages, at least 200 times. and artists from all walks of life have been mesmerized by it and given their illustrations as a rendition of Hyams' poetry.
Even though I have good looks, a good face, and a height like the cypress, never knew in the pleasure place of the earth why the painter of eternity gave me such a beautiful birth.
It has been written that Khayyam traveled to many cities after leaving Isfahan, before going back to his birthplace. It is said that he died in December between the years of 1122 and 1131 in Nishabur. In early 20th century, Khayyam's tomb was renovated.
Last night, in a workshop of a potter, saw 2,000 pots, some quiet, some talker. Suddenly, a scream came out of one. Where is the buyer? Where is the seller? Where is the potter?
Today, there are many monuments, buildings, and streets named after him throughout the world, from Iran to Morocco, all the way to South Africa. But of all the things named after him, the most interesting of all sits thousands of miles away from the earth, at a longitude of 58 degrees north, a latitude of 102.1 degrees west, and 70 kilometers in diameter. The lunar crater Omar Khayyam.
If I am drunk with wine made by Zarathushtri priests, I am. If I am a non-believer, a fire worshipper, or an idol worshipper, I am. Each clan has its own assumptions of me. I am of my own. I am what I am.
Omar Khayyam was an Iranian genius whose work as a mathematician and an astronomer has affected the world in an undeniable way, and his philosophy and poetry will always be discussed for many years to come.
برخیز و مخور غم جهان گذران، خوش باش و دمی به شادمانی گذران. در طبع جهان اگر وفایی بودی، نوبت به تو خود نیامدی از دگران.